The wind on the summit of Bleeding Stone was not merely cold. It was a blade honed on the edge of the celestial vault, carved away sound, memory, and weakness with equal ruthlessness. A figure knelt in the center of a shallow, frozen crater. This was Xingye, a name that meant wandering knight. He was young, barely past his 19th year, yet the lines etched around his eyes spoke of millennia of accumulated fate. His robes, woven from coarse, black mountain hemp, offered scant protection against the biting air. He was performing the third cycle of the God-shattering heart technique, a forbidden martial art. This technique was less a method of cultivation and more a controlled act of self-destruction. It required him to draw the raw, unrefined energy of the frozen earth directly into his nascent spiritual core. This process risked instant, agonizing death. Every breath Xingye exhaled turned into jagged ice crystals that immediately shattered upon contact with the ground. This was the sign that the technique was progressing correctly. His spiritual core, the Danshan, felt like a miniature sun struggling against the crushing void of deep space. It pulsed violently, demanding release. If he failed to stabilize the energy, the expansion would rip apart his meridians, rendering him a crippled husk. If he succeeded, he gained power few mortals ever touched. For generations, his clan, the remnants of the ancient Tianqing line, had pursued this catastrophic path. It was the only way to survive the enmity of the Central Realm. He was the last student of the Wandering God legacy, K, title that once commanded awe and now only drew the executioner's steel. The legacy was too potent to be allowed existence. Ash! Sheng slowly raised a hand, tracing a sigil on the air before him. The ice crystals orbiting his palm turned gold. This simple act, the manifestation of pure, destructive ki, was the reason for his solitude and the cause of his eternal flight. He could not be caught. He stabilized the swirling gold, holding the unstable chaos of power within his grasp. The process took a full 20 minutes of agonizing, absolute concentration. He finally opened his eyes. They were the color of glacial meltwater, pale, clear, and infinitely old. His internal landscape, the battlefield of his soul, had expanded slightly. He had broken through another minor obstruction in his cultivation. This gain was necessary, but it was also a warning. The residual spiritual signature was detectable by masters miles away. He rose instantly, his muscles coiling with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. Leaving no impression upon the ice beneath him, the technique demanded silence. His gaze swept the horizon. The mountains were a tapestry of gray and white, silent witnesses to countless past wars and inevitable future tragedies. He sensed the intrusion before his physical eyes registered it. It was a disturbance in the mountain's natural resonance, a deliberate disruption. 3 plumes of black smoke, thin and sickly against the bright sky, rose 20 miles to the west. These were the signal flares of the Jade Serpent clan. They had found him again. Their persistence was the only constant in his life. The Serpent clan hunted him under the decree of the Celestial Court. His lineage was deemed treasonous, and his techniques blasphemous. He calculated the time. At their current speed, the lead scouting party would reach the summit of Bleeding Stone in less than half an hour. Xingye quickly gathered the small leather satchel containing his necessities. There was little to carry: a worn volume of ancient texts, a few medicinal pellets, and his blade. The blade, named Star Eater, was sheathed at his back. It was not a weapon of conventional steel but solidified starlight, heavy and utterly unique. He knew he could not fight the entire contingent. His goal was not victory in this skirmish, but survival and the continuation of the legacy. He found a narrow, shadowed fissure in the summit's sheer face. It was an old smuggler's path, known only to those native to the harshest peaks. He entered the crevice. The cold amplified, turning the air viscous and heavy, but the path offered immediate concealment. His feet found purchase on nearly invisible ledges. He moved downward with speed that belied the treacherous nature of the descent. The first scouting party arrived at the summit moments later. They wore the distinctive, shimmering jade armor of the Serpent Guard. There were 5 of them, led by a middle-aged cultivator whose aura radiated a cold, steady malice. This was Commander Lei. Commander Lei surveyed the shallow crater where Xingye had cultivated. He did not need to see tracks to confirm the presence of his target. The spiritual residue was overwhelming. It was the volatile signature of the God-shattering heart technique, unmistakable and horrifyingly powerful. "He was here," Lei stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The power signature is fresh. He's broken through another level." One of the guards knelt, touching the shattered ice crystals. "Commander, the residue is almost pure energy. He is drawing power too fast." Commander Lei sneered. "Fools believe the wandering god path leads to ascension. It leads only to a brief flash, followed by a violent, pathetic implosion." He looked toward the horizon, his hand resting on the hilt of his executioner's saber. "We will be the ones to extinguish that flash." Lei gave a series of complex hand signals. The other guards immediately dispersed, taking up surveillance points around the summit. Xingai had reached the midway point of the descent when he heard the faint, high-pitched whistle. It was the Serpent Guard's silent signaling method. He knew they were spreading out, trying to cut off any obvious escape route. They expected him to flee into the open valleys below. He altered his course, moving laterally across the cliff face, seeking a detour into the notorious Glacier of Whispering Souls. The glacier was a labyrinth of constantly shifting ice spires and crevasses, notorious for swallowing both light and sound. It was suicidal terrain, which made it the perfect sanctuary. As he reached the entrance to the glacier, a sudden shadow fell across his path. Commander Lei had anticipated his move. Lei stood silently on a small wind-buffeted plateau, his saber already drawn. The blade hummed softly, vibrating with contained spiritual energy. "Xingai," Lei announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "The Celestial Court offers you one chance for a quick death. Surrender the starter blade and the forbidden scroll." Xingai tightened his grip on the leather satchel. He did not speak. Dialogue was a luxury he could not afford. His silence was his response. It was the only answer his lineage had ever given to their oppressors. Commander Lei sighed, a sound of heavy administrative weariness. "Very well. Another corpse to carve into the ice. Such a waste of talent." Lei launched himself forward. He moved with the practiced, economical grace of a high-level cultivator who relied on supreme foundation rather than flash. His saber descended in a swift, devastating arc. It was the jade-severing strike, capable of splitting mountains and tearing key shields. Xingai responded not by deflecting, but by accelerating. He became a blur of black cloth, moving perpendicular to the strike's path. His movement was the void step, a technique that momentarily allowed him to displace his body through thin space. It was not teleportation, but close to it. The jade-severing strike hit the rock where Xingyi had stood a millisecond before. The peak trembled, and a chunk of the plateau sheared off and plunged into the abyss. Lei's eyes widened momentarily. The speed of the void step was greater than intelligence reports had suggested. Xingai did not press the attack. He knew Lei was only the vanguard. He needed to save his spiritual energy for the greater threat. He retreated further into the shifting chaos of the glacier. He needed the terrain to be his ally. Lei pursued, his heavy boots crunching on the ice. He was determined to end the hunt here and now. The commander was strong, but Xingai was driven by the desperation of the hunted and the power of the forbidden art. His exhaustion was palpable. Xingai finally drew the Star Eater. The blade was obsidian black, but as it caught the pale sunlight, it momentarily flashed with 10,000 pinpoints of light. It sang a low, melancholy chord, a sound that spoke of broken oaths and shattered celestial thrones. Lei paused. The power radiating from the Star Eater was immense, exceeding even his expectations. "Do not mistake the weapon for the man," Boy Lei warned, cautiously circling. "You wield only a sliver of the wandering god's power." Xingai spun. The Star Eater did not cut through the air, nor at the fabric of the space surrounding it. He unleashed the first movement of the sky-shattering form. It was a vertical slash, meant to cleave everything from the earth to the highest heaven. The force of the slash was not just kinetic energy. It was focused spiritual pressure aimed directly at Lei's internal core. Commander Lei roared, raising his jade saber in a desperate defense. He poured all his protective ki into the jade barrier. The Star Reader hit the barrier. The sound was not a clang of metal, but the dreadful crack of a celestial sphere breaking. The jade barrier shattered. Lei was hurled backward, his jade armor cracking like thin porcelain. He skidded across the ice, coming to rest near the lip of a massive crevasse. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He was stunned. The sheer, raw power of the attack had been impossible to predict. Shingai stood still, Star Ritter held loosely. He was breathing raggedly, the effort of the sky-shattering form nearly collapsing his dantian. He had won the moment, but the cost was staggering. His legs were shaking, and his vision swam with spots of dark interference. He looked down at Lei, who was struggling to stand, his eyes burning with renewed hatred and shame. The battle had lasted less than a minute, yet it had drawn the attention of the secondary guard forces. More whistling signals echoed across the peaks. Closer now. They were converging on the glacier's entrance. Shingai sheathed the starter. He had his opening. He did not wait for the commander to recover. He took the void step once more, vanishing into the spiraling depths of the glacier. Commander Lei struggled to his knees, clutching his chest. His spirit core was bruised, but his life was secure. Rage fueled him. He knew Shingai could not have maintained that level of power for long. He runs. Lei shouted into the wind, his voice raw. Find the tracks. Follow him into the glacier. Do not let him escape this time. The remaining guards swarmed the plateau, their faces grim as they saw the damage inflicted upon their commander. Shingai pressed deep into the glacier's heart. He moved blind, trusting only the subtle shifting of his inner ki to guide him past deadly ice pits. The ice spires were enormous, towering monuments to geological time. They reflected and distorted light, creating a maddening confusion of false paths. He pushed the limits of his bruised spiritual core, relying on sheer willpower to maintain his momentum. He had to be miles away by nightfall. He knew this was a temporary respite. His fight had confirmed his immense danger to the Celestial Court. They would now send true Grand Masters, the ancient hidden swords of the Central Realm. He needed a place of complete, profound concealment. He reached a section where the ice gave way to a natural cave carved into the underlying black granite. He slipped inside. The air was warmer here, strangely humid, and it smelled faintly of ozone and old, dry parchment. He lit a small, carefully shielded flare, illuminating the cave. It was a pre-human structure, perhaps a forgotten sanctuary. In the center of the cave, mounted on a weathered stone pedestal, was a single, smooth slate tablet. The tablet was not inscribed with text, but with an intricate swirling diagram of the cosmos. Shingai approached it slowly. This was not the work of mortals. The energy residue was ancient, predating the time of the wandering god. He ran his fingers over the diagram. It detailed the motion of distant stars, the path of a comet, and a confluence of spiritual nodes. He realized what it was, a map, but not of physical terrain. It was a map of spiritual energy convergence points, leading to a single, powerful location. The location was marked by a single, stylized character. For Sanctuary. Beside the pedestal, partially obscured by crystallized water, was an old leather scroll. It was not the forbidden scroll the serpent guard sought. He unrolled it gently. It contained only one prophecy, written in the archaic script of the first 10 Qing elders. The god Shatterer must not rest until the wandering path intersects with the shadowed abyss. There, the final seed of sorrow shall be sown, and the legacy shall find its desolate purpose. Shingai looked at the cryptic message and the star map. His exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. His path was now clear. Even if the destination promised only the final seed of sorrow, he tucked the map and the prophecy into his satchel. Replacing them with the minimal contents he now considered dead weight. The hunters were closing in outside. He needed to move, and he needed to follow the stars. The pursuit was over, but the true journey of the wandering god legacy had just begun. He extinguished the small flare, plunging the cave back into absolute darkness. His breathing returned to the deep, silent rhythm of the god-shattering heart technique. He faced the dark mouth of the cave, the weight of the starter blade a familiar burden on his spine. The sorrowful purpose of his inheritance awaited him in the shadowed abyss. He did not hesitate. The only escape was forward, toward the desolate fate foretold by his ancestors. He took one last shuddering breath of the mountain air. His lineage demanded one last sacrifice. If you enjoyed the high-stakes action and the deep dive into the wuxia lore of Xing'e, make sure to show your support. Comment below and tell us which Grand Master you think the Celestial Court will send next. Like this video script to help the Storycraft Studio channel grow, share it with fellow fantasy fans, and subscribe for part 2 of The Legacy of the Wandering God.